Stephanie. All right, welcome. We want to say welcome to Will Allen. This is the segment of the Neighborhood Food Network. Thank you so much, Will, for coming on tonight with us.
Okay, it's great to be on with you all tonight to talk about food and how to grow food and so forth. So
yes, so I just want to say quickly before you come on, I had a bio lined up, but I think my screen went away with that. Will Allen is a famous basketball star. He played with the NBA back in his younger days, and then he started to grow food in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with Growing Power. He had this wonderful facility that's just everybody who walked onto that facility got trained and how to compost and how to love worms and how to grow food. And so you've been doing this for how many decades, Will, would you say?
gosh, well, I've been farming for about 60 years.
All right.
But
So
the
you've been doing this for a
organization-
long time, training people how to grow food. And tonight you're mostly going to be talking about container gardening, right?
Right.
And okay. And if you could find a way to keep the camera still, it would just be easier for us. And yeah, thank you so much. Keeping it still, that'd be really great. And so we're going to talk mostly about container gardening. And so think of your questions to ask him. We really appreciate everybody being on with us today and for your patience.
And everyone, Will started helping me 3 years ago, I think. And so my garden started to get planned out with Will's guidance.
Yeah, he was Anne's mentor, and then Anne sent me pictures of all the beautiful food she was growing, and I said, I have to grow food, and so we moved to 6 acres, and now we're growing food, and now we've started the Neighborhood Food Network. So look what you started, Will. Look what you started.
Well,
So
that's
we
good.
appreciate you so much. You are causing rippling effect of people growing food all across the country.
Well, I'm glad that because it's a must today because the cost of food and just go to the grocery store and you'll have I'm sure everybody knows that right now. So I think we're in an era where people are growing more and more food. I know I'm getting more and more requests to help people grow. But some of the simplest ways of doing it is probably what I want to talk about tonight, because I grow food from, call it container gardens in 5-gallon pots to pretty large scale farming. We were growing 350 acres of vegetables. Our farm in Milwaukee, which was the oldest farm in the city of Milwaukee, the only registered farm in the city of Milwaukee. We grew enough food on those 3 acres to feed 10,000 people. Very intensive production method.
And this was on concrete, right?
Yeah, some of it was on concrete. It all started, of course, with soil. It's all about the soil. So if you don't have good soil, it's very difficult to grow anything. I'm sure everybody knows that. So that's what we did. We grew thousands of yards of compost, and eventually we had over 100 greenhouses growing food in and around Milwaukee and southeast Wisconsin. So,
and what were the elements of the compost? If somebody's got a whole bunch of concrete around them, how do they start making soil?
Well, you have to, of course, have carbon and nitrogen. Carbon, you looked at in terms of brown stuff like wood chips and cardboard and hay and straw, moldy hay and straw, leaves, things like that on the carbon side. And nitrogen, of course, is food waste. And we're in a city where we have breweries. So we have almost an unlimited amount of brewery waste from different places. A lot of microbreweries. We would collect like 8,000 pounds a day of brewery waste to get our compost started. And that's really the best nitrogen you can possibly have, along with food waste from, food wholesalers and food processors and grocery stores, coffee grinds from not just coffee shops, but actually folks that actually turn that coffee beans into grinds and they overproduce. Everybody overproduces on the processing side. So we're able to pick up that material, which is kind of a challenge, but we were able to do it. Once we started doing that, we also got a lot of food waste delivered from Walmart. Walmart is probably the best collector and separator of food waste. But on a small scale, I would say like what Ann has done is started some composting in a 4x4 pallet configuration, which she has the image up right now. And it takes quite a bit of material to get that, but that produces a yard of material. So if you're a backyard gardener, that's the way to go. If not, you can also find somebody like me, who has grown thousands of yards and have compost, and you can purchase good compost. But it's very important that you do some research and make sure you find the right composter to buy from, because not all compost is equal.
Look at that compost.
Yes, that's what it looks like when it's finished.
That is beautiful. So that is mostly worm poop. Is that what you would say? Breakdown of,
No, that's not. That's just from a combination of 1 part carbon, 1 part nitrogen in the process. And then that's what you get. Now, you don't sift that compost. You don't put it through a sifter to make it real fine, because when it rains, it would just run off your beds, or it would run out of your raised boxes, as I call them. A lot of people call them raised beds. I call them raised boxes. But
okay.
a lot of people are growing in their backyards or side yards or front yards. Of course, I promote that because I hate grass. I think it's totally unnecessary. It's more important to grow food.
Yeah,
But-
absolutely. Look at that. That's beautiful.
So
Is
these are some of the results you get from having good soil. And of course, the worms come into play if you're not using chemicals, because they just naturally will appear. Even if that area has used chemicals, it takes a couple of years before it's chemical free.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So, so JS says, I've been growing fava beans as a cover crop in a curbside strip, and they're flowering now. What am I supposed to do with them now? Can I eat some of the flowers, greens, and beans?
Yeah, I've never eaten the flowers, but of course the beans are delicious. This image that I'm showing you right now, that's from this season. I grew a lot of salad mix. Mixed greens, you can get seed from many companies now.
Mhm.
One of the easiest things, once you fill those 3 or 5 gallon pots with soil, you can sprinkle the seed, cover it, and that's the result you get.
That's
So-
great. Will, we're getting some feedback. It sounds to me like you might be moving your phone. Is there any way you could put your phone down, lean up against something on a desk so that you're not touching it? And we're not getting.
Okay, I'll try that. And see
Yeah,
if that
yeah, don't hold your hand over the speaker or anything like that, because it's gonna be hard for people to hear it later. If we.
How's that?
Yeah, I mean, I wish your face wasn't so far away. Can you sit up closer, straight to it?
Sure.
Yeah, closer so that it kind of looks like you're standing way tall above us. Because
I'm sure Ann told you my technical skills are very limited.
well, that sounds better though. We don't hear any noise. That sounds good. Okay,
Yeah,
so
if you're rubbing your hands over the bottom of your phone, that's where the speaker is.
yeah,
Oh.
so now that's better. If you're not touching it and you're not moving, that is much better. Thank you so much. Okay, so if you have a concrete backyard and you get a bunch of, would you start with your kitchen scraps and some soil that you've purchased from somewhere, and then add a bunch of leaves and grass and scraps to it? Like, how would you get someone to start building soil so that they can put good soil into pots?
Well, if you're
Steps
do it
they would take.
yourself, you're gonna have to, like I said before, if you can get 4 pallets and connect the 4 pallets and you put your material in that system, like that first image that came up, that would be the way to do it. Now, that's very challenging to do this because that's a lot of material that you have to collect.
Mulch and
Too,
different.
too much on the carbon side and you don't have enough nitrogen, you're not going to have good compost. It has to be 50% carbon and 50% nitrogen, which is made up of food scraps, or like I said before, brewery waste and food scraps.
What about grass clippings?
Grass clippings, but again, grass clippings I've never used because of the fear that they might have chemicals. There are some chemicals that are used that just destroy your garden. So I stay away from grass clippings.
Yeah, unless it's your own grass and you know that it hasn't been.
Unless you know where they came from.
So can you give us newbies examples of what are some carbon elements and what are some nitrogen elements? What's the difference between
Carbon
those?
would be, like I said, wood chip.
Okay.
Almost anywhere in the country, you can get wood chip. Even if I was in Florida, which I've done work in Florida, they, do a lot of trimming because of the nature of the palm trees that are always coming down in storms and so forth, and they grind those up. That would be adequate to use. But here in the East and, Midwest, we have unbelievable amount of wood chip. Every time there's a storm, branches come down and the different municipalities, they don't even know what to do with all the material. And then the other place you can get it from are people that are in the landscape business. They're always grinding up tree limbs and so forth. So they're willing to bring it to your site. Like I know Ann had deliveries of many of the, many of the wood chip came from landscapers that just delivered like 10, 15 yards at a time. And on the nitrogen side, you're looking for food waste, which is a little more challenging because you have to develop the relationships with the grocery stores and food processors and breweries to get that. But you need 50% of that and 50% as you're building. So what you do is you build it in layers, starting with carbon, put down a carbon layer and then a nitrogen layer and just keep doing that whole thing until it's filled, like that image you're looking at right now.
Okay, and then do you have to toss it and turn it, or do you just let it sit and water it now and then?
You can build a similar bin right next to it and flip it, and that'll after about 3 weeks it'll heat up to about 135 to 150 degrees if you have that much material on there, and then you flip it about once every couple of weeks back and forth. So you actually start out with 2 bins, an empty one and the one that you initially start with. Now, if you don't want to do that, that takes about 4 months to do that. Now, if you don't want to flip it, you can do it in a static state by just leaving it in the bin, but you have to make sure you add moisture to it because you want to create those microorganisms that actually do the work. They actually break down the material. So those little bugs in there actually do the work for you.
Now, do you add red wigglers? Is that what you suggest? Would they be
No.
No?
When you get compost finished, then you can start a worm system using the compost by adding worms to the compost.
Okay.
Now they eat that compost as their food, and they multiply at 4 times their numbers every 4 months.
Okay.
So if you start with, say, 10 pounds of worms, you're going to have 10 times 4. worms after 4 months.
Okay,
And then you can start other systems. Now, we started with just a small amount of worms, and eventually we had 7,000 pounds of worms on the farm in Milwaukee. So we were able to ship worms to all of our partner organizations. We're a nonprofit, so we were able to give worms to groups all over the country.
that's
It
great.
gets
So people could become worm farmers in doing this. I have a
My
couple,
compost had a lot of worms in it.
I have a couple questions. One from Jody. She says, I'm still confused what to do with the fava beans as the next step in having them be a cover crop. Does she cut them or does she like till them back into the soil? Does she
Yeah,
eat them? What does she do with the
yeah.
fava
She
beans?
wants to, the best way to do it, it would be to cut them and then turn them over.
Okay, does she keep the
Typically,
fava
she-
beans? Does she keep the fava beans in to turn them over with the fava beans or does she eat the
Yes.
fava beans?
Yeah, I would turn them over if that's
Okay.
if that's what she wants to do, because what she's trying to create is the same thing that we're doing in that 4x4 bin. She's turning that in and composting is happening underground. And that's where the worms and other microorganisms are come into play.
Okay, great. And then Frankie asks a question, typical breweries usually use glyphosate sprayed grains as, in their products, the hops and the barley and, things like that. Does cooking it in the compost denature the chemicals? Does that get rid of the glyphosate, do you think?
That's a great question, and it does.
It does?
You-
Okay.
That when that compost heats up, it gets rid of all of that.
Yeah, and I would think it's not just the heat. What I know from some other farmers is that there's actual microbes in the soil that can break down glyphosate into non-toxic components, especially if there's acetobacter in there. So if you have vinegar or sauerkraut that you want to add to that compost pile, I would say that that could encourage that chemical reaction to break apart glyphosate into non-toxic components. It's been proven in a African study out of Nigeria. I think it was 2018, which is, and it's on our website, Moms Across America, that acetobacter, which is found in apple cider vinegar, kombucha, and sauerkraut, can actually break apart glyphosate into non-toxic components in the soil. It wasn't proven in the human gut, but I'm assuming what happens in the soil is what also happens in the gut. So I incorporate those things into my daily diet. So yeah, we would encourage you to work those into your compost as well. Anne Marie is asking, will this type of compost attract mosquitoes?
No,
No?
I've never had that problem. No.
Okay, great. And Andrea Grace says that she loves this, and there's a great book too, How to Grow More Vegetables by John Jeavons. I don't know if you've heard of him, but she's just putting that recommendation in there.
Yes,
And yeah, and then so now you've got this great compost, the soil, so you can start putting it in containers and growing food, right, in your backyard or whichever. Now, how can you give us some tips on growing in containers? Do you have to have giant pots? Can you start with small pots and then move to bigger pots as the plant gets bigger, or should you not move it? Does that disturb the plant too much? Can you give us some tips
no,
on
you
growing?
can use like a I don't know if you have that image, 3-gallon to a 5-gallon container. Now, I wouldn't run out and buy, that's a fancy one right there.
Okay.
I wouldn't run out and buy those. I would contact landscapers. They don't grow their own plants. So they order in to do their jobs, these containers like what
These
you see.
black pots. Yeah, these black, they're kind of cheap black pots right there, right? That,
Yes, and that's what the salad mix that I'm growing right now is in.
mhm.
I used to grow about 2,000 of those. You can actually set up a complete farming operation by using these pots because they just throw them away or they sell them to folks that chip them up to build other products. So there's tons of these around. I mean, I've got my farm that I'm cleaning up right now, we've got 6,000 of them just sitting there. And I've given away so many to different folks who want them just to get rid of them. But you fill that pot up to about 2 inches from the top. And then you put your plant in. You can grow peppers, you can grow tomatoes, you can grow salad mixes, you can grow herbs in them, you can grow hemp. I'm a hemp farmer, so I grow my hemp in those, from my CBD company. So you can grow just about anything. It's all about the soil. It's all about the power of the soil, the good compost.
The soil that's in this pot you see here is from Will's.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes a lot easier to farm if you understand this, that soil is so important. A lot of people don't understand that, but they'll go out and dig up some soil, or they'll get something delivered from say a subdivision that's being constructed by some of these soil companies, delivered, and that stuff may have all kinds of chemicals in it. So you really need to know where your product is coming from.
Yeah, and there are people who do, help support create soil that is very good quality. So you just need to ask them questions. Can you tell us what are some of the things that you want to ask about if, to know that it's not good soil? Like I'm guessing animal bones, ground up animal bones could be fed GMOs and glyphosate and all of that. So I probably wouldn't want like chicken bones, chicken meal or whatever in my soil. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, you really want to put it through the composting, and you can recompost existing soil. For example, when I was doing this on a pretty large scale, we had seedless. There were no weed seed. We at 150 degrees, 135 to 150 degrees, you kill off all the weed seed, and that's really important because for at least 2 years in our hoop houses, I don't know if you have an image of some of the product in our hoop houses, we had no weeds. Eventually, you're going to get weeds because a lot of weed seed comes in on your seed stock. If you buy seed, they always have a little bit of weed in there. And then if you have doors open during the summertime and the wind blows in weed seed, you have a problem. But basically, you want to start out with making sure that the compost you're using doesn't have a lot of weeds.
Okay. But what would we ask a soil supplier about? What would we not want to have in the soil? What are some ingredients?
Yeah, like I said, some of the ingredients would be bindweed is one that a lot of people are really having a lot of trouble with. And that's like a vine that grows, excuse me, it's very difficult to get rid of. It kind of grows underground and it pops up. It doesn't grow very tall, but it just takes a lot of the energy out of your soil. So what you're trying to do when you're growing something is get maximum amount of energy to your plant. One of the most important thing in your compost is having compost that has been made from wood chip, because wood chip you can grow. You can grow fungi. You want your soil to be very fungally rich. Fungi only grows on wood. So you really want, it doesn't grow very well on straw or any other, or cardboard or newspaper or things like that that are carbon items. But you want that wood chip. That's why we use so much wood chip, because I want my compost to have lots of fungi. Fungi is what delivers the nutrient to the root zone of the plant. So you need a delivery system to deliver that nutrient, and that's what you get from fungi.
Okay. We have a question. Lisa, unfortunately, has a landlord that has turned off the outside faucet because he doesn't want the tenants using the water. Do you think she can use a water barrel outside, a rain barrel, to collect enough water to actually, water her garden? Where do you live, Lisa? What area do you live? And how do you feel about collecting rainwater? Will, can you move the camera so we can see your face?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, okay. Remember, don't move it around. Yeah, keep it still. Thank you. Do you think she can collect enough rainwater to water her garden?
Oh, yeah. Um, that's that's what we do a lot of, collect rainwater um, off of the downspouts or whatever, or even if you just, I don't know if anybody's ever left their wheelbarrow outside after rain. Say a 1 inch rain, you would get probably half a wheelbarrow full of rainwater,
Yeah. Yeah,
which is the best water to use on your garden.
it's the best water because it has certain kinds of electricity in it, isn't it? That it comes down negative ions, I think it is, that helps spark the plant to grow. And that's why after it rains, you get a lot more growth than just watering it. Isn't that correct? Has something to do with the rain,
Yeah,
what it collects.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but I know rainwater is better than municipal water.
Yeah.
We're fortunate in my house, we don't have municipal water. We were able to, even when they developed the area, we kept our well. So I have well water, and that works much better than, say, chlorinated water or whatever
we
they're
want to stay
putting
away
in
from that.
water today.
Yeah, so Jody asks, my 4x4 raised bed is full of mushrooms. Is this okay as long as I don't eat them? It seems like an awful lot of them. They do seem to be keeping my veggie starts from getting eaten up, which is good. Do you have any advice about having a raised bed with a lot of mushrooms in it?
I guess she must have bought mushroom compost. I would bet she bought mushroom compost. I haven't dealt with that issue. I've dealt with just having a few, uh, because the spawn will get into the wood in a raised bed and so forth. But I would pull out because they just take up the space if she's got a 4x4.
So they're taking up nutrients, right? These
Yeah, they're
mushrooms?
taking your nutrients and plus they're taking up your space.
Yeah, your space, yeah. Although mushrooms do, I talked to a mushroom expert, he said that they can draw up pesticides and toxins
Yeah.
out of the soil. So they are doing something good, right?
They're doing something good, but if they're
Yeah.
taking up all your space,
Yeah,
if it was me,
yeah, you would get rid of them.
I'd
So
get
Marge
rid-
is asking, so you put your soil down and then you put your plant in and then you sprinkle the compost over it, or do you mix compost in with the plant when you plant it?
we grow directly in the compost.
Okay, you grab the
We
compost.
start
and put it-
with all compost. We don't put topsoil, we don't sift it.
okay.
We grow directly in compost and we've had tremendous success doing that.
I can vouch for that.
Great, okay. Let's see, Chris is saying that Mike Adams said that rainwater is some of the cleanest water, if not the cleanest to have on hand, so it's a great idea. We just set up our, a rain barrel too. We have a barn and we just took the, the gutter and the pipe and put it down into a barrel, but first you have to hook up a spout at the bottom of the barrel, and something that I learned was from the Tractor Supply guy was that you don't want to use a brass spigot because the metal in contact with the plastic rainwater barrel the metal will eventually eat away the plastic and it'll just, all leak out. So you want to use a plastic, PVC thing to be the pipe, the part that's coming out of the rainwater barrel, and then put your spigot on it and make sure to wrap it with plumber's tape, to seal it. And
Right.
so, yeah, so we just set that up. So I'm glad somebody mentioned that. My son and I did that together and it's just rained a whole lot. So we're starting to gather rainwater because we're not sure our well is going to be able to, water all of this, everything that we need to water this year.
Right, if you have a greenhouse or a hoop house, you can set these 55-gallon drums around the exterior. And as the water cascades off after rain, a tremendous amount of rain comes, or water comes off of a building. You wouldn't believe how much water comes off of these buildings with a 1-inch rain. Uh, I mean, those barrels
Yeah.
fill up in 10 minutes.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So you have to have other barrels, you would say, to connect to fill up as well, so that they don't just overflow.
Yeah, I just set them around the, right up against the wall of
Oh,
my,
okay.
I had them like 50 of them around the hoop houses, and I would capture all of this water, and then we would pump the water out of the barrels to use inside the hoop houses.
Great.
So there's all kinds of creative ways that you can capture rainwater. You can just, like I said, set barrels, get a number of barrels if you have enough space and sit them around, and hopefully you'll get some rain.
And can you find some pictures of rainwater barrels so that we can show people that maybe are not familiar with what that is? Frank, you mentioned plumber's tape keeps the spigot safe. I just want to make sure that people know that some of those tapes have PFAS in them, PFAS, it's the forever chemical. So you want to make sure as much as possible it's on the outside of whatever it is that you're, trying to keep secure and not on the inside in contact with the water. So yeah, thank you, Anne. That's a good example of a rainwater barrel. And as you see on the left there, that's where a hose is, but you could also put that tube to go to other rainwater barrels so that you have, an opportunity for runoff into other barrels. But you'd also have to put a spigot at the bottom of those. And I like how it's up off the ground so that you can more easily access it for, hooking a hose up to it on the bottom as well. We didn't do that. We didn't raise it up off the ground. So
Yeah, you can actually put 2 concrete blocks for that 55-gallon barrel underneath. Now, a simpler way would be just to get it filled up and use a watering can and dip down in there and water your plants. I have one of those in one of my smaller greenhouses, and that's how I water.
Yeah.
I just fill it up with water, and then the temperature of the greenhouse, the water will get the same temperature as the water in the greenhouse. And that's important because you don't want to put like cold water on your plants
mhm.
when you're first starting. Let's say your seedlings, you're starting from seed, which I recommend people start doing, because when you go to a garden center today to buy plants, you're paying a lot of money for plants. And I know there are different folks that actually start their own, get a growing system, and it might take a year or two to pay off, but it's really worth it because you can start your own tomato plants, pepper plants, or any kind of plant, flowers, uh, in the basement or a room somewhere with grow lights. That's really important to really go back to that beginning point of buying proper seed. You want to make sure you buy the right seed. And, I don't like to recommend seed companies, but there are a lot of seed companies today
Mhm.
that have a big variety, like Johnny's out of Maine, where I buy most of my seed because they're farmer friendly, and I used to use them at Growing Power, where we, you know, uh, just spent a lot of money buying seed from them.
Yeah,
And
they have a really good catalog. Before you get into seed starting, because I know that's a whole nother topic to itself. I want to address Frankie said that, oh no, sorry, was it Frankie or somebody? Let's see, somebody else mentioned, Rebecca said that Zach Bush mentioned that rainwater has high levels of glyphosate in it from overuse and to use the Berkey filter. I want to say that I do not believe it's true that there are high levels of glyphosate in rainwater. All of the studies that I have seen have shown very, very low levels of glyphosate in rainwater. It is there, or it can be there, but it's not going to be everywhere all the time. If it was, nothing would grow. Like nothing, everything would be dying. So,
Right.
because glyphosate kills everything, every living thing on on contact, except for the GMOs that have been genetically engineered to resist it. So I believe that it is in very low levels in some places sometimes, which can attribute to, some things dying off, but not everything. So let's see, a 10,000 gallon rainwater tank is what Carla used at her source for her home. And Joan is saying if you buy soil or compost in a bag, do they have to list all of the ingredients and what goes into it? You know, that they're calling soil or compost, or do you think, Alan, Will, that they are putting in things that we don't know about?
I would say they're putting in things that you don't know about. I wouldn't buy compost that was in bags. You're gonna have to do a little research and find a farmer or somebody who composts to find out uh, who grows the best compost. I call it growing soil. I don't even call it composting what I do. I grow soil. I grow soil from materials that came from Mother Earth, and all I'm doing is putting them back in after they've been broken down. Like I said, wood chips, remember, they're coming from trees that have taken up soil to grow that huge tree and the limbs and so forth. So you're really doing Mother Nature a good thing by using wood chip. The only thing that I would be careful of when you're buying your compost is to make sure it doesn't have things like bindweed in the wood chip. But I think the process that I use kills. You got to make sure you get that temperature up to 135, 150 degrees, and you'll get rid of a lot of that kind of stuff. So that's really important, the temperature of your compost.
You want to get a thermometer that's kind of like a turkey thermometer, I'm guessing, a long.
Well, they make compost thermometers that have
All right.
a piece that's about a yard long, and then you can stick it down and you can probe different areas of your pile or your bin to find out what the internal temperature is. I think you can get that from a place called Peaceful Valley, but I think they sell them everywhere now.
So
Okay.
Will, I was told, and whenever I order wood chips from Get Chip Drop to be delivered, I always put no black walnut. So I'd like
Yeah.
your opinion on that because of the jug loan or,
Yeah, black walnut, I would, I don't know. It depends on, again, it depends on the amount of composting you're doing. If you have a little bit of black walnut, a little bit of whatever, if your system is big enough, it can withstand that. But if you're just doing a very small system, you got to be very discriminatory in terms of what you put in the compost bin.
Okay. So, but for people who don't have a year or so right now, they want to get started in growing in pots. And I mean, you're like a sommelier of wines. Like you know the highest quality of soil. But are there any soils that you would say could be okay for somebody to get started in right now? Have you researched the different types of soils that you do buy in a bag at the store?
Well, I would definitely go to a garden center that has a good reputation. I'm not so sure if you go to places like the big box stores, you're going to get the same thing as you would at a smaller greenhouse operation that sells bedding plants. I would definitely go to a smaller operation and talk to the people because they'll spend more time with you than in a large, and they'll have more knowledge than some place like the big box stores because they just hire people off the street and they don't know anything about anything other than maybe they'll carry your plants to your car for you or something. If
Yeah, that makes sense. Smaller places, just like Know Your Farmer, right? Try to find
yes,
somebody
yes,
who's selling soil. I know around me, there are farmers that just produce soil. They just have giant compost piles, and one's called Dirt Craft. They're really great. And so they're smaller and they tend to be more accountable, right? It's more about our personal integrity and what is
yeah,
going into that pile and versus a gigantic company that doesn't have any, doesn't have much accountability. So somebody's
yeah.
asking why black walnut, because it is used as an antifungal. Yes, it has something that it kills off, what is it called again? Jugalone?
It's called,
Juglone, Juglone, and it does send out a toxin, so plants won't grow around it. So it's a very smart tree.
Yeah, and can be used as an antifungal. Actually, you can actually take it as a tincture. People sell it as a tincture to take black walnut to kill off fungus if it's in your gut. But refer to your local herbalist about that. I'm not a doctor. But it would only be good for the garden if you know that those plants can grow with, you have to look up the jugalone, you have to look up plants that can grow in.
So
the
the
presence
link, yeah, the link I just put in here lists
Okay.
down the page all the plants you can grow around black walnut.
Okay, so Frankie's saying it inhibits the sprouting, but it isn't so bad for already growing plants. Okay, that's good to know. Because I just got some soil from an area where now I remembered afterwards had a black walnut tree near it. And so I'm afraid that my sweet potatoes that are coming in contact with that soil might not grow, but you're saying because they've already sprouted and they're already growing it, they should probably be okay? Yeah?
yeah,
Okay.
I would, one of the things I want to mention is that when you're making a purchase of compost, you want to make sure that the compost has nitrogen in it. Most compost in America is carbon rich. In other words, there's more carbon than nitrogen. And you really need those bugs. That's what makes the plants grow. Otherwise, all you're doing is putting black carbon into your garden. So you want to make sure that when you question the composter, ask them what percentage of nitrogen is in their compost.
Okay, what percentage of nitrogen? And I was told that when my, I don't know if, I think it was my peppers started getting yellow leaves. Howard Vliger, another farmer, told me that they didn't have enough nitrogen, so I should soak some chicken poop, which I happen to have chickens, in water for, I think it was 3 to 6 days, and then I could use a small amount of that chicken poop water, dilute it down to supplement my garden with nitrogen. Does that sound like a decent way to put my nitrogen? I mean, it seemed to work for me. I just didn't remember how much of the nitrogen, the chicken poop water I should use per
Or
gallon. I
you
don't
can,
remember.
or you can make some compost tea. If you've got really good compost,
Okay,
you can go to the paint store and get a 5-gallon, what's called a painter's screen, which is a mesh bag, and you fill that up with about halfway up and tie it. And then you put that into water overnight. Now, if you add a aerator and put it in say a 5-gallon or a 55-gallon drum, that bumps up the microorganisms that are in your soil that you're putting in that barrel. And then you just use that as a foliar feed for your plants. But what doesn't go on the leaves fall into the ground, or you can add it to the soil itself.
okay, yes, foliar, so it means you spray it on the plants rather than just
Or
putting
you
it
can just take a watering can. I'm real
watering
big
can, right? Okay, watering can.
on
Okay.
this watering can, about a 1-gallon watering can. They're not that expensive. You can buy those, and they have a bunch of small holes in them, and that works as well if you have a small backyard garden or front yard garden or
Yeah,
raised
yeah.
bed.
Do we have any other questions for Will? We
I
still
have a question
allow us- okay.
about, I've been reading a lot about using a foliar feeding with some Epsom salts being diluted in the
Yeah,
water.
I've never done that, but because I just use compost tea or worm tea made from my worm bins. That's the best that you can possibly use.
That could be a whole call in itself about building
Yeah.
worm bins.
Yeah, I
Worm
mean,
tea.
developing a worm bin, which is pretty easy to do. In using that, you can get a lot of bang for your buck by using that worm compost after you remove the worms, and then I can tell people how to get the worms out, because the worms live over 20 years. So you want to, I look at them as livestock, not just worms. So you want to recover your worms to be able to use them another day, you know. I mean, if you just put them in the garden, that's okay too. But to make the tea, I don't think you want your worms in your compost when you're doing the method I just described with the mesh bag.
No, they'll drown.
That is a wonderful way of adding nutrient to your plants.
Great. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions for Will? Okay. Well, we want to get to, thank you very much, Will. I don't know if you can stay a few more minutes. Anne, can you show that video? Do you have it queued up? The one about the timing? I just want people to take a look at the planning and the timing. Do you have that video or not?
No, but let me see if I can find it real quick.
Is there anything, Will, that you can share with us about, it's on the website, right? It's right on the website under videos and resources. It's a new video that Anne just added about timing. One of the biggest mistakes I think I've made along the way consistently is not planting the plants when they should be planted. You know, looking at the cold weather crops versus the warm weather crops. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh, I can't plant until Mother's Day. I can't plant until after Mother's Day. But there's actually a lot of crops that you can plant in February and March and April that are cold weather crops, or you plant them in the fall ahead of time. And then they're growing like gangbusters in March and April. So do you want to say a little bit, Will, about timing with crops and like what should be going in the ground right now? Well, let's just say in your
Well,
time.
it
your
depends
garden
on
zone.
your zone, of course. You're in
Yeah.
North Carolina, right?
I'm in garden zone 7A or 7B.
So we're 5 here in Wisconsin, Milwaukee area. So you're way ahead of us. You're going to get tomatoes, let's say, I would say end of June, maybe.
Okay.
We don't get tomatoes till July. So, but there are different ways of speeding up. Like I've got a friend who just, he bought 2 hoop houses from me, and he's already got multiple crops that he started in February without a heater in a hoop house. So he brought me down lettuces. He brought what else? He's got kohlrabi. He said next week. He's got us, you know, like I said, the salad mixes, carrots. And so he's way ahead of the country. Just having put up a small one in the backyard, and put up a larger one. It depends on how much you want to grow for your family or whatever. But that season extension, you can also put hoops over your beds in your backyard by using 9-gauge wire.
Okay.
And putting
9-gauge
relays.
wire. And put hoops over. This would be for the spring or for early spring or fall if you want to keep your crop warmer and extend your crop time. And can you pull up the video so we can show people what it looks like to actually plan out so that you get better about putting crops in the ground at the right time? Can you screen share, Ann, please? There we go. And just, can you fast forward a little bit? We want to get to the part where he shows the actual planter. Yeah. So yeah, there you go. Somewhere around there. Go ahead. We need to hear the sound, so you just turn the sound on. Can you turn the sound on, Ann? So what you're looking at, just in case you can't turn the sound on, is the part in the red.
Red represents 2 layers of
sorry.
protection, such as a cold frame inside a hoop house. Yellow is 1 layer, like a cold frame. And green means there's no protection. The red vertical line is our last frost date. As a rule, I determine outside planting dates by starting with the recommended dates found on seed packets and in books like Square Foot Gardening. I then move the date as much as 3 to 4 weeks earlier for each layer of protection. This approach is designed to increase yields in our small garden by extending the growing season for cold-hardy crops. However, as an experiment, this year we'll also start some of our tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants using this approach to see how it goes. I should note that the schedule can change depending on the weather. So far, we've had a relatively mild winter, and the schedule reflects my expectation that the mild weather will continue. But if the weather turns for the worse and we have heavy snows or extreme cold, the schedule could be delayed. We're also starting some plants in our grow room. The indoor planting schedule is very similar to the outdoor schedule, except that red represents when plants are indoors and green when they're outdoors. As you can see, we're starting heat-loving basil, eggplants, peppers, and tomatoes indoors. We're also starting our celery, broccoli, and cauliflower indoors because we haven't had the best luck growing them in our shaded garden, and we want to give them every advantage. Now let's take a look at the garden layout, which includes the entire backyard garden except for the hoop house. I've excluded this area of the garden because it's already entirely planted, mostly with edible perennials and self-sowing annuals. The layout shows where and when I'll plant each crop. We don't have to plant all of the dark green areas because most already contain established perennials, but the rest of the garden will be planted with annuals. The dates under each crop indicate when we'll plant or transplant the crop. You may notice that we scatter many of our crops all over the garden instead of planting them together in a single bed. For example, we have tomatoes here, 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 and here. We do this because interplanting crops with a variety of unrelated crops in various locations helps reduce pest and disease problems. Now let's
Okay.
review the complete planting schedule from start to finish. We started
Dan, can you
planting on
stop it?
February 13th here in the hoop house.
Okay, thank you. I just want to acknowledge that it's 9:32. Ann can put the link to that video in the chat box. It's also available on neighborhoodfoodnetwork.org under resources and videos. She just put it up there.
We planted lettuce and spinach in this
And
cold
you
frame.
can,
And kale,
can you stop the noise? Okay, thank you so much. So you can find the whole video there. It's excellent. And I don't want people to get nervous about it. It looks so complicated. You made a spreadsheet. You know, just get a piece of paper and write it down on a notepad if you want to, but definitely look at when you should be planting things. It's usually written on the back of the packet, especially Baker Creek Seeds has it very clearly written on the back of the packets, you know, 2 weeks before frost or 2 weeks after frost, things like that. Find out your local frost date. You can also find that available on the neighborhoodfoodnetwork.org under resources. Find out your garden zone. That's also available under neighborhoodfoodnetwork.resources. And find out what, you know, what tasks you should be doing when. And we're having somebody compile a list of tasks to be done by month per garden zone. And we're hoping to be able to get that into a Google Calendar or Outlook Calendar. And with hopefully one click, you'll be able to add all of these garden tasks by garden zone for each month. And we're hoping, I think that would be awesome, because for me, that's the biggest problem. Is like, oh my gosh, when am I supposed to be doing something, right? What time of year? And I haven't seen that out there that you can just automatically add it to your calendar. So we're working on that. So please do, you know, stick with us and all of that. So, and do we have the business card up for Neighborhood Food Network, or is that going to be maybe next week? We'll talk about that. You're muted. I can't hear you.
Yes, I have it.
Okay, can you screen share that? So thank you, Alan. Again, if you have to go, we want to thank you so much for being with us. We're just going to share one more thing on here, and thank you very, very much for sharing.
Just to say one other thing.
Yeah.
Here in Wisconsin, we've had a very poor spring. It's been very cold. So as you look at these dates when you're supposed to plant stuff, you have to be flexible in terms of really understanding. I mean, I look at the weather every day. I look at the long-term forecast almost daily to see if it's changed, because weather is everything when it comes to growing food. And the other thing, other tip that I wanted to throw out there, and I tell this to folks all the time, is grow enough for the animals too, because your garden is gonna, if you're in an area like we are with deer and other things, you can wind up, you know, losing a lot of your crops. So just be real flexible.
Okay, I will. I don't know why. I'm sorry, I cannot, computer's, okay, here it is. This is your old Growing Power. This is where you had aquaponics as well. And my
Right.
computer's being very slow and not showing what's going on here. But thank you very much, Will, for being with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay.
Thanks,
great.
Will.
All right, great. And Ann, you were just gonna
Thank
show one more
you.
thing before we
Thanks,
go?
Will.
Good night.
Good night. Okay, so just for those of you who are left on this page, if you could zoom in, Ann, to the Neighborhood Food Network card. Ann is willing to do a card for you. If you want to start the Neighborhood Food Network in your area, she will make a customized sort of business card or calling card with your name and your information on it. We just ask that you donate between $3 and $10 a month. We would love that, just so that you can support the work that Ann's doing and everybody's doing to keep this program going and to create, right now we're in the pilot program, so we're really getting off the ground, and having your support would be fantastic. So Ann has passed out her card to all kinds of neighbors, is getting all kinds of connections. I mean, she's talking about this to everybody everywhere. And she also grew way too many tomatoes, like 187 tomatoes. So now she's selling them. So you could, the money that you put into this, you could easily make back in selling tomato starts or pepper starts next year. So stick with us, keep learning, and we will support you. And the farmers that we have on and the growers we have on will support you in being able to grow an abundant amount of food for yourself, your family, and probably even your community. And thank you, Ann. You can take that down. Thank you all so much for being with us. We appreciate you. Thank you, Lisa and Lady Carla and Chris and everyone. We really appreciate you so much. Thanks for being with us.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Ann. Thanks,
Thank you so much,
everybody.
Andrea.
Thank you.
everybody. Carla.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Night.
Bye.